Dorot Professor of Modern Jewish History and Holocaust Studies at Emory University. In her scholarship, she's explored the treatment of the Holocaust in the American press and has dealt firsthand with Holocaust deniers. Dr. Lipstadt's new book is Antisemitism Here and Now. Many of us who have studied with her know she is a learned, engaging, and passionate teacher, and I know you join me in welcoming her today. Dr. Lipstadt.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. You almost didn't have me because of technical difficulties, but we seem to have worked those out. I also want to apologize in the beginning for being on the call a little less time than originally scheduled. That's in part because I'm flying to Heidelberg in a few hours to talk about anti-Semitism. So it's been a little bit of a crazy period. As I said to someone this morning, every one of us, and I'm sure there are many on this call who have written books and engaged in important projects, when we complete them, we hope to be relevant. I would have been very gratified to be a little less relevant. Hello? I'm getting other sounds, and I'm hearing myself in the feedback.
Deborah, try turning the volume down on your computer.
I'm not on my computer. I'm on my phone. It wouldn't work, and now I'm hearing myself feedback. Can't talk that way. I like my voice, but only once. Okay, that seems to be a little better. In any case, okay, thank you. That seems, whoever did something resolved it. I would have been very happy to be less relevant. It's really quite amazing, and I'm getting that feedback again. No, I can't talk with myself echoing in my ear. As some of you have heard me say when I've taught at Hartman and other places, can somebody do something? This is impossible. Is there anything? Hello?
David, maybe try making sure you're muted as well.
Pardon? I can't. I'm not here.
I'm muting.
Yeah, I may be hearing somebody's phone, but okay, that sounds better. Whoever, thank you. When I wrote the book, and again, I apologize if some of you have heard me tell this anecdote, but I think it's a good way of framing our conversation. When I wrote the book, I finished it in, I would say, early June of 2018, and sent it off to my editor at Knopf, at Schock and Knopf, for final edits and copy edits, etc. And at that point, I don't know, early August, you get back what's called author's last pass galley. In other words, that as an author, that's your last chance to make any changes. After that, it's in production and you can't change anything. As I began to go through what I had sent in, I don't know, 6 weeks before, 8 weeks before, I saw that so much had happened in those 8 weeks that I needed to update. So I called my editor and said, listen, I know you're just supposed to be, an author's only supposed to be making minor changes at this point, rewrite the book, but it just won't be relevant. And she agreed, and I added, I would say, in print, what must be 20 to 30 pages dealing with the Labor Party in the United Kingdom, things that had come out subsequent, dealing with the Polish government's law about Holocaust denial, dealing with Israel's response to that law, et cetera, et cetera. And I worked on it diligently, and finally my editor called me, I would say, second week in September, and said, Deborah, we must have the book. It's about to go into production. You're not dealing with a small public operation when you're dealing with Knopf. They're selling it. It's in the catalog. If I don't have it by Monday or whatever it was, it just is going to be delayed. So the last paragraph I wrote, and it's somewhere in the introduction, is I don't believe in predictions. I don't believe, because I know the past and have studied the past and teach the past, that equips me to predict. but I'm willing to go out on a limb and make the prediction that by the time this book appears, something will have happened that should have been included. And of course, that something was, as was mentioned in the introduction, a yard site that we will mark on Shabbat of what happened in Pittsburgh. I think everyone in the Jewish community, and it doesn't matter lay or professional, Amcha or our most educated and aware leaders, feels what the British would call as gobsmacked, sort of hit in the side of the head. What happened? What just happened? Where did this all come from? When I first began to write, I guess 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, some people asked me, why are you writing this book? Once the book appeared in February, nobody asked that. And the question I now get is, when are you doing an update? So, it's somewhat, I've never had this experience. Of course, this is the first time I'm writing about something that's absolutely contemporary, but still, it's quite amazing. I think what we're seeing now is what I like to call a perfect storm of anti-Semitism. We're seeing it on the right. We're seeing it on the left. We're seeing it from Islamist extremists. And we're seeing it from the fourth venue, which I think is important and which is many people, myself included, find delicate to talk about because it can sound like you're painting with the same broad brush that you're arguing against and you're saying is wrong to use. But we're also seeing it from segments of the mainstream Muslim community. This is particularly in Europe, where imams, leaders, teachers, whomever, talk about Jews in a very derogatory fashion, talk about Jews in an anti-Semitic manner. And of course, many of the people who hear this will never engage in anti-Semitism, don't believe they are engaging in anti-Semitism, but repeat these tropes, repeat these stereotypes, and even repeat them. I know a young rabbi at Duke who is in a Muslim-Jewish dialogue group with other religious leaders, and one of the Muslim participants, who chose to take part in this group, engaged in this kind of rhetoric. So it's the first time that I can think of that we're seeing it so consistently from both sides. Now, some of you may have seen my piece in yesterday's Forward, or went up yesterday on the Forward website. I guess there is no official Forward anymore in print. Taking on Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders wrote a piece for Jewish Currents, which was republished this morning in The Guardian, which is a pretty, established venue. And he starts by giving a very accurate assessment of anti-Semitism on the far right, white nationalism, extremism, etc. And then he says something to the effect, I don't have the article in front of me, the fight against anti-Semitism is part of progressivism, or it's a central part of for a progressive. But he failed to address the anti-Semitism, which is very much on the left, as we see exemplified so clearly in the UK Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. I'm in the UK 4 or 5 times a year minimum, and many of you I know travel there as well, follow the news very closely, and talk about being gobsmacked. The Jews in England, small in number, feel utterly gobsmacked by what has happened. Many people are, 3rd, 4th generation Labour Party. The Labour Party was always the one against anti-Semitism. It wasn't that the Tories were for anti-Semitism, but it was sort of built into who they looked to, who they accepted as leaders, etc. Not far from what you might have described as the Republican Party of the 1950s and early 60s. That this just wasn't a place for Jews.
But Deborah, Deborah, David Bernstein, can I just dig deeper on that a little bit? I'm gonna interview you a bit.
Sure,
as well,
sure.
so.
Okay, you can stop me anytime. I'm happy to be interrupted.
Yeah. Some of our colleagues in the Jewish world are looking at what's happening in labor and are worried that it's that we're already there in the United States, and that we've already seen the Corbynization of the Democratic Party. Is that your view, or do you believe that the United States is in a different place than the UK?
I think we're in a different place. That doesn't mean we couldn't get to that place. But I think today we're in a very different place. But you see in the Labor Party, and this is worth paying attention to, not just if you're concerned about British Jewry, but also for understanding warning signs. What we see in the Labor Party, David, is not only an engagement in anti-Semitism. You know, Jeremy Corbyn has, as many of you know, and as I talk about in the book, welcomed the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah to the parliament and described them as our good friends. He's never met a Holocaust denier that he hasn't found something in common with. Not, he doesn't deny the Holocaust, but that's irrelevant to his relationship with them. So, and you've had many of those around him and leaders, and Ken Livingstone, the former mayor of England, et cetera, engage in overt anti-Semitism. It's all over the place. But there's something even more concerning, David, that troubles me deeply, and that is when this has been brought to the attention of the party, there has been a very strong inclination to not only dismiss it, i.e., not take it seriously, but to do something even worse, to turn around and attack the person who has brought the charge of anti-Semitism and say, you are only doing this for an ulterior purpose. You're doing this to bring down Jeremy Corbyn. You're doing this to attack the leadership. You're doing this, very often it's connected to Israel. You're doing this to protect Israel, even when Israel has nothing to do with the conversation. So in other words, where there is a pretty much standard reaction on the left when someone from a minority group, from someone from a group that has been the object of persecution, discrimination, comes and says to you, I was a victim of racism, I was a victim of homophobia, I was a victim of sexism. The default position is to take them seriously. You might investigate and find out that, you know, you shouldn't have taken them so seriously. You might investigate and find out that they overstated the case. That could be. But here, the default position is to say, no, this can't be real. No, this can't be serious. No, you are, making this up. You're to malign us, to attack us, so that the person who comes and says this happened to me is attacked as the perpetrator, as the wrongdoer, and that has been very, very disturbing, David.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're there. I don't think we're there in the United States.
So contrast that with the discourse in the U.S. over the left and the right. You know, you see the left point fingers at the right and saying this is where the anti-Semitism resides, and you see the right pointing the finger to the left saying, no, this is where the anti-Semitism resides. How do you, do you see parity in both ways, and do you think the threat is similar in both places?
The threat is similar.
How's it different?
Yeah, thanks. No, it's a good question, David. Yesterday in the article, I called Bernie Sanders the Moshe Dayan of anti-Semitism. You know, with a patch on his left eye, gives him 20/20 vision in the right eye to see anti-Semitism on the right. He has many compatriots who wear their patch on the left eye, and the right eye, and don't see what's next to them, but see what's on the other side of the transom. And both are seeing something very real. What we're seeing on the right is, of course, more openly violent. We're seeing, Pittsburgh, Poway, the gentleman who was just, I don't know if I should call him a gentleman, the man who was just arrested by the FBI in Colorado, who was casing a synagogue, and planning to blow it up in the middle of the night because even if it killed people, because he didn't want to do it during the day, he might be caught. And so many other instances in Ohio and so many other places where things were halted because of good police work. That's very much an attitude on the right. Now, some people want to argue that's just a fringe, that's just lone wolves. First of all, I think one of the things this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's important. One of the things we should banish from our conversation is the concept of lone wolves. With the internet, that it's anachronistic. It doesn't exist anymore. The murderer in Pittsburgh and the murderer in Poway in San Diego County quoted the same people, cited the same websites, as did, I believe, and I'm less certain on this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. The murderer in Christchurch, New Zealand, who attacked the mosques. So in other words, you don't have to meet up anymore. You don't have to encounter one another anymore. You can just go on the internet to Mrs. Google, in 1 minute you're reading the same things. So that's what we're seeing on the right. And if someone could say, well, it's only in that it's bad, it's dangerous, it's horrific, but it's only in that small segment of the far right. The problem is it migrates both ways. It migrates with conspiracy stories. It migrates with comments. It migrates from places as mainstream as Fox News, where you get references to conspiracy stories, references, for instance, to George Soros, funding an invasion of people from south of the border, et cetera, et cetera. So if you keep in mind, and this is bringing coals to Newcastle to tell a group of rabbis this, but that all genocides, and David, you heard me say this on Tuesday or Monday, all genocides begin with words. So the words start more to the center, but they validate what those on the extreme want to do, and they push some people to the extreme. No genocide here, no committer of genocide ever started, I'm going to go kill. He started with being influenced by words. So that's the situation. Right. Yeah, go ahead. I'm listening.
Right. But interestingly, David Sousa, who's the editor of the Jewish Journal in LA, wrote a piece not too long ago saying that anti-Semitism on the left is even more lethal because, as you said, it uses words. It unleashes the virus of mass destruction. And those are some strong words. And it's saying, and he's arguing back, no, the anti-Semitism on the right is not more serious. Anti-Semitism on the left is also lethal. Do you share that view?
They're both lethal. It's, I don't want to get into a food fight, so to speak, and I don't mean to diminish the importance of this at all by that term, which is worse. They're worse in different ways. Right now, on the far right, it's violence. We have guards in front of our synagogue, primarily to guard against the far right. They kill people. On the left, what I would say is, and what David is saying when he said they use words, it's structural. It's not, let's go beat up people and kill people, but it's structural. It's in the organization. It's in the way of writing, the way of thinking. But that can lead to violence. That can lead to certainly extreme hostility towards Israel, and I don't mean criticism of Israeli policies, but visceral hatred of Israel, and encourage people to do violence. So one right now is structural, one on the other is violent. Both are very dangerous in different ways. We shouldn't waste an ounce of energy in the debate over which is worse. It doesn't get us anywhere. It certainly doesn't help resolve the problem.
So when we think about responding to the right and we think about responding to the left, do we think about them differently? Are our strategies the same in both cases, or do we use the same playbook?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure, and this is going to sound very strange and I think somewhat depressing to some people, given what I've been doing for the past 4 years, and especially since the book came out, immersed in this topic. I'm not sure what the playbook is. Yes, I can give you things that we can do. Yes, I can give you actions we should take. But in terms of responding, I think one of the things we have to do on both sides, and certainly on the left, this is one of them, is get people to take this seriously, even when there are not dead Jews. And I'm not being flippant here. Everyone responded to Pittsburgh. Everyone knew Pittsburgh was horrific. but the question is, when it doesn't result in something like that, there's a tendency not to take it seriously. And I think that's one of the main things we have to do. And you know what? I think it is the same on both sides, because though the anti-Semitism is coming from two different sides, David, it's the same stereotypes. It's the same motifs. It's the same idea of Jews' money, Jews' power way above their measure in society, and Jews, intellect, but not good intellect, cunning, malicious, devious. We address the two sides differently, but we've got to recognize that's also what's frightening. It's not two different forms. They're both relying on the same stereotypes. So to some degree, they even reinforce one another.
Right. So there's this argument that says that left-wing anti-Semitism is different in that it expresses itself primarily in denial of Israel's right to exist and anti-Zionism and the like, and that's harder to recognize for the average person. It's more abstract, and therefore, if we try to just condemn it and hoping that it'll retreat to the margins of society, we end up being bitterly disappointed. It doesn't disappear. People say, "Well, I'm sorry, but we don't view that as anti-Semitism." And if that's the case, and maybe it's not the case, maybe you have a different view on that, then does it require a different type of strategy than our traditional strategy, which is to condemn it and wish it away, or do we have to engage it more than we would the
Yes.
other form?
We have to engage it more. And sometimes it's going to mean not engaging the person who is engaged in it. In other words, if I were in the UK, I would not spend an ounce of my energy on trying to convince Ken Livingstone that he's wrong. Ken Livingstone, peddles the theory, as I'm sure many of the listeners know, that the Zionists and the Nazis were in cahoots. That the Havara Agreement from '38 was the Zionists making common cause with the Nazis. That the SS, he says, set up camps for Jews to train them, etc., which of course is ridiculous. There were in the beginning of the 30s Hachshara camps, but they weren't set up by the SS. They were set up by the Zionist Organization of Germany, the various, and the various Zionist streams. But I wouldn't try to convince him, because he's a hater and he's an anti-Semit. There's no question about it. But the people who listen to him need to be educated, need to be shown, and we need better strategies for engaging them. We can't just say, as I just did, "Oh, he's an anti-Semit, don't listen to him." We've got to show them the illogic, the ahistorical nature of the argument. And it calls for a difficult but important engagement, David, because it's also, this is what young people on campuses, not every campus, not every young person, but many, are absorbing and taking as a given. And that calls for, taking a deep breath. You may want to slug a person, or just say, that's anti-Semitism, but you got to listen and you got to engage, as you, David, wrote in your recent piece on how not to fight anti-Semitism.
Right. So let me then throw a very recent case study, and I'm sure we're going to have more of them in the future. We had the Women's March, and we had certain figures in the Women's March, some of the key founders and organizers who were close to Farrakhan and defended Farrakhan, and that was problematic for us. And there were people in our own community saying Jewish organizations shouldn't touch the Women's March with a 10-foot pole because they're now tainted by their association with anti-Semitism. And then there are others who are saying, I'm sorry, that may be true, but if we don't engage some of the other organizers around the Women's March, we won't be at the table. And as one person responded saying, if you're not at the table, then you're lunch. So how do you come down on that? How do we navigate when to blacklist, when to erect a litmus test, and when to engage?
I think, and I wrote something on this on the Women's March, I think for Hadassah magazine. To my mind, I can make common cause with people who may have ideas that I don't like. If my neighbor was a Farrakhan supporter, but we're both trying to get a traffic light on the corner because our kids are being, when they try to cross to catch the school bus, are in danger for their lives. I'll work with that person because we're working for something quite specific and far away from any ideological or personal beliefs. But when it comes to marching behind people like Linda Sarsour, people like Tamika Mallory, who have both engaged in overt anti-Semitism and giving cover to anti-Semites like Louis Farrakhan, I can't march behind them, especially for a cause that is ostensibly about human rights and about equal rights. It just makes no sense. Having said that, I think it's very important not to just say, oh, that's it for the Women's March. I'm not going to have anything to do with it, or that's what much for the causes the Women's March stands for. I believe with every soul of my being in those causes, in the fact that there are women who face discrimination, there are women who face prejudice, there are women who face sexual abuse and sexual of all different kinds from people for whom they work or people with whom they work, etc. And those are all issues that have to be addressed. Just don't ask me to do them in the wake, marching behind someone like Sarsour or Mallory.
All right. So I want to put another recent case study to you, and I think we're spending more time on the left precisely because it's more complicated, and there's
Yes.
even more disagreement in our own ranks about what constitutes anti-Semitism, and perhaps we can get to that in a second. But we had the comments from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar recently, where she said that it's all about the Benjamins, and there were some dual loyalty charges and so forth, and some people said to me, are you sure the Jewish community is not jumping the gun on this? That if you're too assertive, because then some people might not understand that that's anti-Semitism. You haven't yet made the case it's anti-Semitism. And it might even look heavy-handed to criticize somebody right from the starting gate who's new to the public realm and is an immigrant. I mean, at what point do we give somebody a chance? And at what point do we sort of say they've crossed that line and we now should see them as an anti-Semite?
Right. Look, I think, Ilhan Omar didn't parachute into the House of Representatives out of no place, not ex nihilo. Mm-hmm. She was a member of the House of Representatives, I forget what it's called, in Minnesota. She had Jewish colleagues, one of whom may be on this call. She had, and they sat with her and they talked about trying to educate her and explain to her what anti-Semitism is, what a sensitive issue it is, et cetera, et cetera. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. At some point, you got to say, this is not a mistake. Some point, you got to say, this is a pattern. And in her case, I do see a pattern. It's all about the Benjamin's babies. Jews have hypnotized, the dual loyalty. At some point, you say, Ad kol v'lo hena, to this point and no further. And there's also something else when people say, well, she's a refugee, she doesn't really understand. She's been educated in this country. She was smart enough to win a seat in the House of Representatives, and we had a president, a couple of presidents ago, which some of us look upon now with great fondness and melancholy, George W. Bush, who talked about the bigotry of low expectations. You're a member of Congress. You're a member of Congress. I don't care if you're an immigrant. I don't care what your background is. You're a member of Congress, and you have a certain responsibility. And if you don't have the background or the information to take care of certain things, then you are all the more obligated to get it. So now, having said that, I think there are people who've gone way overboard in their comments about her. And if you don't think it's morally wrong, think about it strategically. I mean, she has also been threatened with death threats and things like that. That's her. People who do that are only giving her a gift. I mean, it's a strange way to talk about a death threat, but then she becomes the victim. Um, Sometimes I think we're very good at shooting ourselves in the foot. Um,
Right.
and and I
Um,
don't and we also, and this is something, David, you addressed in your article on from I think Monday or whenever it was, um, that we got to be careful about labeling people, but we also have to recognize when they've crossed the boundaries.
mhm. So, after the Omar affair took place, there was a debate over congressional resolutions that I thought really hammered home an ongoing dilemma we have. On the one hand, you had many Jews saying it's time for a unique resolution on anti-Semitism, and it should be only about anti-Semitism. And the Congress should speak clearly in its outrage against anti-Semitism. On the other hand, that's not what happened in the end. In the end, there was a more generalized resolution against bigotry, and anti-Semitism was mentioned prominently in there, but it wasn't just about anti-Semitism. And I had spoken to my member of Congress, Jamie Raskin, who I believe wrote the resolution at the behest of the Speaker of the House, and he said, "Well, look, doesn't it make sense to embed anti-Semitism in the larger discourse on bigotry? Shouldn't we seek to have anti-Semitism stated in the same breath as other forms of bigotry and racism, rather than to try to treat it as a unique form of bigotry?" What do you think about that? And how should we in the Jewish community regard it?
Yeah. I think on some level the answer to that is yes. Let me set aside the issue of the resolution right now. On some level, the answer to that is yes. So many of you know that a few weeks ago, the UN, Special Rapporteur at the UN, Dr. Shahid, issued at the request of when you're a Special Rapporteur, you report to the Secretary General, so you're not having to run through all sorts of hoops of this country wants that and that country wants this. Issued an excellent report on anti-Semitism, and I take a little bit of credit, not for the content so much, though he did rely on my book, he told me, and we did meet, but on his spelling, his correct spelling, no hyphen, lowercase, But what was important about that report, not only was its content, but that it was coming from the Human Rights Commission of the Council or whatever of the UN. In other words, it was the human rights operation, which has spent so much of its time condemning Israel and condemning Israel generally unfairly and singling out Israel, etc., saying this is part of the human rights agenda. And I think it's very important, and there have been a number of Jewish organizations, the American Jewish Committee, ADL, who have worked very hard, the Jacob Blaustein Institute at the committee, Felice Gare, have worked very hard over decades to get the human rights community to say anti-Semitism is part of the panoply of human rights issues. Absolutely agree with that 100%. And in fact, it's to our interest. If you're going to care about human rights, don't say to me, I care about human rights, but anti-Semitism doesn't count. Then you don't care about human rights, or you're an anti-Semite. Having said that, going back now to the issue of the resolution was responding to a series of events, of anti-Semitic events. That was the time for a resolution about anti-Semitism. I was up on the Hill. I was asked to go up on the Hill by a number of groups, and I met with a series of leaders, House leaders, etc. I met with people of the Speaker's staff who were helping to draft the resolution and were surprised by this pushback. And I really think it was a reflection of some people's failure to see this as an important issue. And, well, of course, we'll just lump it all together. After the terrible tragedy at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, if they had pushed for a resolution, it shouldn't have been a resolution condemning anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, etc. It should have been a resolution condemning racism. That was a racist attack of the worst order. There are times, what is it? The time to speak and a time to be silent. There are times when you push this in the human rights agenda, and there are times where you say, wait a minute. This is something different. This is something unique. This is something that needs to be called out. You see, and your question, David, really points at the dilemma that we're in, because on one hand, it hasn't been taken seriously by the human rights community. On the other hand, it there are times when people look at it and say, "Oh, it's not serious. We don't have to point to it individually." So I think it was a mistake, and I told some of the representatives with whom I met who weren't supporting it, including some of the Jewish members of the House, that in this case there should have been a singular resolution. Having said that, I think our effort on the human rights agenda, and any of the listeners who are involved in various human rights organizations, is to say, if you're really concerned about human rights, then this is a human right, and I shouldn't have to be making the point to you, but I will make the point.
Right. So we're getting some questions. I'm also getting people texting me who know me for a long time and are watching this and want to make sure that their questions get in as well. The issue of campus anti-Semitism comes up all the time, and I spent a lot of time doing campus advocacy and familiar with the situation. On the one hand, you'll talk to many Jewish students, and they'll say, "Well, our campus is a pretty great place. I mean, yeah, there's anti-Israel sentiment, but it's a place I feel comfortable in." And then you'll hear other Jewish students say, "Well, I'm being shut out of a social justice coalition, or I'm feeling it's a hostile environment." What can we say about campus life today,
Right.
and how prevalent anti-Semitism is?
Just last night, less than 12 hours ago, I was at a session sponsored by Emory University here in D.C. We met at 6 and I, at the synagogue at 6 and I, and instead of just bringing me in to talk to the parents, alumni, friends of the school, etc., they did something very creative and worked out beautifully. They brought in three Jewish students, different backgrounds, different outlooks, etc., to talk about their campus experience. And most of them have had very affirmative experiences. One who's a member of a fraternity hosts a Seder to which his non-Jewish brothers in the fraternity are thrilled to come every year. Goes to Shabbat dinners, Chabad, Hillel, et cetera, et cetera. Another one is in meditation and talks to other groups in her meditation groups. It's a wide variety of experiences. I think a lot depends on what campus you're on and what the tenor of events at the campus are. Now at Emory, we did have an anti-Semitic event last spring, and I think one of the reasons it got so much attention, well, first of all, because there was false information about it, but also because no one expected it. It came out of the blue. It came because we were targeted by a national, anti-Israel groups, and it was the eviction notices put up on students' doors or pushed in under their doors. Now, the story went out immediately that this was within the Jewish community, that Jewish students were targeted, that they were only picked Jewish students' doors. I wish they had. It would have been much easier to go after them if that had been the case. And I'm only being half facetious. But that wasn't the case. And I would sit at, I live in the neighborhood adjacent to the school, so I would sit at Shabbat lunches or whatever in the few weeks afterwards, and I say, they didn't target Jewish students' doors, and I would be told, you're wrong, they did. I just, I didn't follow the conversation because I had a feeling that the person didn't recognize that I had a bit of a better sense, but there was a certain, hysteria about it. The eviction notices were horrible, and you shouldn't have them put under your door. And then the groups that put them there then called for a boycott. This was where they really overstepped their mark, and I was, as I said, and I say this somewhat facetiously, a little glad that they did. They called for a campus-wide boycott of Eagles for Emory, that's the Eagles for Israel, that's the pro-Israel group, but also of Chabad, of Hillel, of all the Jewish groups on campus. And then I said, this is anti-Semitism. This has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with Israel. But by and large, Jewish students on campus have a very positive experience. But you can go to different campuses where it's quite different. Often it's a larger campus, a campus with a larger graduate school, a more politicized campus, a public campus. where students can be made to feel quite uncomfortable, or it can be smaller campuses. Some of you, I'm sure, read Abe Socha, the editor of Jewish Review of Books and the former professor at Oberlin, his story of what happened with Oberlin and the bakery, etc. So it can happen at smaller campuses as well. But a lot depends on the campus that you're on. Now, going back to our conversation about the left earlier, part of the problem, and I've been talking to some of the people at Hillel, some of the who are based here in Washington about this. One of the problems we face, every campus now has a diversity dean or a diversity provost or a diversity officer to try to make the campus a more diverse place. And many of them, at the best, most of them come out of the human rights field, come out of human rights studies, that kind of thing. So their orientation is a left of center, as is much of the campus. And at the best, they don't get what anti-Semitism is all about. At the worst, they don't think it's a serious problem. But the challenge is to really, and some of them see, and you'll see this if you haven't read Abe's article, it was in commentary, I don't know, a couple months ago, that there was a feeling on the part of the diversity officer at Oberlin that her job was to, support the students in their boycott of this bakery, where essentially nothing had been done wrong, so it seems. But which was being accused of a racist act, and she became part of the effort. That's my job. My job is to push, to help these students who are doing this kind of thing, etc. They're not neutral arbiters. So we face a serious problem there, but a lot depends on the campus itself. Now, I want to say something else in that regard, and it really wasn't part of your question, but I think it's very important. It's very important, particularly for rabbis. We have to be careful, and I am a person. This year, I'm not on the campus. I'm speaking to you from the Holocaust Museum, where I'm spending the years in a research fellowship. But we also have to be careful about our verbiage. Chachamim hishamru b'divreichem. Sages, be careful with your words. Hizaru b'divreichem. What we say when we talk about the campus as a hotbed of anti-Semitism. One of the things that's going to happen, our young people are not all going to sign up for a Stern College and Yeshiva University and Yeshiva College and Truro. They're not all going to do that. They're still going to go to campus, but they're going to make a calculation. And it almost takes us back to the 50s, I don't know, the early 60s. They're going to say, you know what, I want to have a nice 4 years on campus. I do not want to spend my 4 years engaged in battles, engaged in politics. I didn't come here to be a representative. I came here to have a good experience in Ann Arbor, in New York City on the Upper West Side, in Columbia, wherever it might be. So you know what, after that freshman welcoming brunch at Hillel that every Hillel has on Sunday before the parents are packed up and sent home. Some would like to stay, but they're all told it's time to go home. I'm not going back to Hillel. Yes, I want a Passover Seder, a Pesach Seder. My parents know people in town. They know people through their work in the Jewish community, or their rabbi knows someone. I'm going to go to a Seder, off campus, or maybe for Seder I'll go to campus. Maybe for Rosh Hashanah I'll do something on campus. But I'm not going to be active. I'm not going to sit at that table and say sign up for Hillel things. I'm not going to sit at them. Certainly, I love Israel. I've had great times in Israel. I've been to Israel with my family, been on trips to Israel, but I'm not going to talk about it when I get a chance to go on Birthright. Instead of suddenly saying, hey, guess what? I'm going on this fabulous 10-day trip free to Israel. They're going to say, I'm traveling during the break. I'm going to Europe. I'm going to the Middle East. In other words, if we overstate the case in our passion, not out of a diabolical purpose, but in our passion, we're gonna stand the likelihood of making our kids go underground. So
Right.
I had this summer I was at the UJ cabinet retreat, and I happened to be driving from one place to another with Eric Fingerhut, who had just, of course, begun his tenure. And I told him my fear about this in terms of birthright, just as a manifestation. And he said, do you know that's happening? And I said, no, it's my concern. But because Eric had sort of asked me, I began to do very unscientific research. And I've been on so many
Mm-hmm.
campuses, since in the past few months, and talked to so many Hillel people. And it's getting validated that the kids are, staying away from things, repeating tropes that they hear about Israel, etc. So again, it depends, but we have to be careful in our language as well.
Right. And I would suppose it's possible for us to both say that there are problems on certain campuses and there are even hostile environments in certain campuses, and that it's a golden age for Jews on campus and there's plenty of opportunity for Jews to live and enjoy campus life.
That's exactly right. And even more than that, I know Hillel, again, is taking this very seriously, that we increasingly will have Hillel professionals, Jewish studies professors, etc., though not all the Jewish studies professors are going to be so friendly to this kind of thing, but many are, and many will be, who are aware of these problems and are trying to address them. And it's an opportunity. I mean, the challenge is, as we've so enjoyed over the past 3-4 decades, is to allow a young person to have the full experience of a liberal arts education, of being in a setting of academic excellence and inquisitiveness and learning, and at the same time not feel that they've got to go hide their proverbial yarmulke, that they've got to take off their Jewish
Mm-hmm.
star. And that's a challenge. And it's so easy to rail against the campus as a hotbed of anti-Semitism, but we don't do ourselves any good if we're not talking about something specific when we do that.
Okay, so we were both at FedLab, which was the Jewish Federations of North America event the last few days, and there was a speaker, a TED Talk speaker, who's an expert on crowdsourcing, and he did an experiment with the entire group of people that were in attendance. About 900 people were at dinner. He said, "What's the one thing we can do to fight anti-Semitism?" And he crowdsourced it, and we all voted with our phones. And something like the top 4 answers, which I was glad to see because we're in this business, were to build alliances, were to do community relations, were to do intergroup relations and so forth, which I thought was tremendous wisdom in the crowd in this case. But I'm wondering, first of all, A, what do you think about that? And B, if that's the case, who do we really need to spend time building alliances with?
I think it is very much the case. And one time, Jews used to be motivated to do that because we really believed in, the issues of human rights, and we believed in the issues of, full rights for all groups in the United States. Some people have soured on that or soured on building those alliances. So if you're not motivated to do it on ideological grounds or ethical grounds, whatever term you want to use, do it on strategic grounds. I point to the response in Pittsburgh of the Pittsburgh community, broadest Pittsburgh community, to the terrible tragedy there. I've been in Pittsburgh. I spoke in Pittsburgh early this year. I'm friendly with Jeff, so I've gotten reports on things, etc. But the striking thing was the way in which every community stepped forward, and many of them stepped forward not just because there had been a terrible tragedy in their town, but because they knew the Jewish community. They had been helped by the Jewish community. They had an alliance with the Jewish community. Sometimes we're going to have to sit down and meet with people with whom we differ on certain things. Some of them will be Farrakhan supporters. And we're going to have that conversation, and it's a tough conversation to have. I was speaking a couple of months ago with Angela Buchdahl, rabbi at Central Synagogue in New York, and she talked about meeting with some of the leaders of the Women's March who talked about the support they received from Farrakhan, and how they couldn't abandon him. I think you can challenge them. You can say, look, you may have gotten support, or your brother when he came out of prison, the Nation of Islam may be the only one who helped him. That's true, and that's terrific. But you also have to look, if you're going to claim to be a human rights activist, what he says about Jews, the dangerous things. I think we have to make those alliances. We can't just slough it off. And I want to say something. I'm not saying it politically, though it's hard to say not politically. When I was at Fed Lab, I was talking to a couple of people about these various issues. And one of them said to me that one of the outcomes or the negative outcomes of Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech in the House of Representatives on the Iran deal was the feeling in the Black Caucus on the Hill that this was a real slap in the face at President Obama. And the person's to me, and they haven't gotten over it yet. Now, some people may say, well, the issue of Iran was big enough so that we had to take that chance or whatever. I'm not weighing in on that right now, though I have personal feelings about it, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is think about the consequences of what you're doing. Think about the consequences. You know, you can't say, I'm going to fight anti-Semitism, but I don't care about any other ism, because when you need those other, not only setting aside ethical, moral issues, as I said earlier, when you need those people in an alliance, you can't turn around and say, okay, now come help us. And the only way we're going to even begin to resolve this issue is by people in other groups not part of our community saying to their followers, saying to their kids and their families, saying to their spouses, saying at the dinner table, this is a serious issue. And the only way they're going to think it's a serious issue is if we reach out to them and we make them understand that we may not look like your typical victims. You know, when Jewish kids show up on campus and go to the dean or whatever, or some, you know, administrator and say we were objects of discrimination, sometimes it's hard for them to figure that out, because most of the time they're dealing with kids who are not economically privileged or solidly, you know, from solid economic backgrounds, first member in the college, in a family to go to college. We don't present as what many people think a typical victim should present as. Mm-hmm. But and again, many of the listeners know this because I've written it, I know many of you have talked about it. I'm loath to make analogies to the Holocaust. This is not Germany. This is not, you know, in Germany, we just commemorated Kristallnacht. I said this at Fed Lab. A cousin of mine was at a Jewish school in Germany because the Jewish schools in his smaller town had closed down. And in the middle of the night, the teachers came in and said, get out quickly, don't change your clothes, run outside, the building is on fire, the shul is on fire, it's coming into the dormitory. So they ran outside, these little 9, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and they didn't know where to go. So one of them said, let's go to the police officer, because that's what you do when you're in trouble. They went to the police officer, and the police officer looked at them and said, I don't take care of Jewish children, and turned his back on them. That's not now. Now, the administration, every country believes this is a serious issue. Maybe I'd leave out Poland and Hungary. But most democratic countries recognize that this is something they have to deal with. So it's not then. But I do think, and maybe this is a point I've got to close on because I got to go to Dulles Airport to fly to Heidelberg, that sometimes even though we may be talking to someone with whom we don't agree on everything, we need those alliances. That doesn't mean we compromise on our beliefs and on where we stand, or say, okay, I'll accept a little bit of anti-Semitism, etc. You know, people ask me before my trial, people pushed me to settle with David Irving, and as the line even made it into the movie, I said, what would you like me to settle for? 1 million Jews, 2 million Jews, 1 gas chamber. Certain things you can't settle. But we do need friends, and we do need to convince the world that this is a human rights abuse. At the same time, we have to say that there's certain moments when it can't be subsumed into everything else, and we have no qualms about saying this is anti-Semitism, and we ask you to recognize it as anti-Semitism.
Deborah, thank you so much. You know, you've been a hero of mine, and I know many others on this call. I mean, I've been reading you and listening to you speak since I was in college. So you've been very influential on me, and I know many others.
Thank you,
here.
David.
It's wonderful to see how prolific you still are, and you're doing these amazing books and talks, and it's just and we need your voice now more than ever. So
thank you
so much.
Katonti, I feel, I really do feel, and actually, let me repeat again what you may have heard me say at FedLab. On some level, and it's going to sound very strange, I feel lucky. Even though I deal with the most disgusting stuff on a day in, day out basis and get stories and emails from people who've encountered things, so many of my fellow Jews, including I'm sure rabbis on this call, are feeling so frustrated because they want to do something and they don't know what to do. They want to somehow address this issue. And I'm lucky I get to do something. I got a chance to stand up to one of the then world's leading anti-Semites, and thankfully with the help of many people, beat him. I feel lucky because I can be on the front lines, and I very much appreciate the support I've gotten across the community. So I thank you, and I have to go to the airport.
Okay. Well, safe travels, and
take care. And thank you all. And I'm glad it worked out.
Thanks. And I want to also just reiterate what Jacob, Rabbi Blumenthal said in the very beginning. We're so delighted to be able to work with all four major Jewish denominations. I think it was a labor of love for us to put it together, because not only were we providing an educational service, but we're involved in weaving Jewish peoplehood, and we want to see where this can go. And next time, we're going to make sure we get the technology right as well. We'll get better at this as we go along. Okay, thanks a lot, Deborah.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We're gonna invite you all to come to the next webinar with Ambassador Mark Ginsburg. He was the ambassador of Morocco. He's going to talk about hate and anti-Semitism on the internet. That's on November 9th at 12 noon Eastern. So thank you all for coming, and we're looking forward to the next one and for our future collaborations. Thank you to the Rabbinical Assembly as well, Jacob.
You're quite welcome. Thanks to everybody. Have a great day.